Welcome back, everybody, to Up the Cherries and All Departments, and it's another round of cherry picking. It wouldn't be cherry picking if I didn't have my man to my right of me there. Manny, how you doing, mate?
All good, thank you, mate. And we do have quite a lot to speak about, but a lot of stuff certainly away from the field as opposed to actually on the field. And I'm sure you might know what I'm talking about.
Yes, I do. I do. And I think one of the biggest subjects, especially this week, of course, I put out a video. It's been quite popular. Um, it was with regards to the Everton situation. I've had some really positive, and thank you to all the Everton fans for putting on their positive spin. I haven't done the video for that. That is my honest opinion about the situation. And I feel that, off the back of that, and looking at some of the other things that have gone on, we need to look at the person who is driving this. But um, I tell you what, let's start off with one thing that was questionable in our game against Manchester United recently. You saw that game, Manny, and it was a game full of contentious decisions. So I think it's fair to say, and I've said it in my previous video, where I was whinging, and to be honest, it was straight after the game. Of course, the tensions were running high. Some people have said that robbed by the referee was probably the wrong title, but it's how I honestly felt. Now let's start off with the penalty shouts, the two handball shouts. So of course, Maguire. Well, some people would have said that it was a handball, and we should have had a penalty against Maguire. Personally, I think it would be very, very harsh because the ball has gone to his arm, and this is what's really frustrating with modern day football. And I don't know if you agree with me, Manny. That if a ball is, even when I was a kid, if a ball is kicked towards you, it is very difficult to move a particular area of the body, unless you are, fully expecting it. Especially if you're really close. If you're trying to make a challenge, for example, and you are a fair distance away, you could say, right, okay, if you have handled it, fair enough. But if it is close quarters and the ball is struck and it strikes your hand, I think that's a different. I think we need to start looking at these rules. And I don't think that it was a penalty against Maguire at all. And the referee made the right call on that. However, I did say that I didn't feel that it was a penalty against Adam Smith. And it was a similar sort of situation. It was a similar sort of range, and the referee gave that one. VAR didn't step in to overturn it, which is a bit of a bugbear because it seems to get involved for everything else. But Manny, what did you make of those two decisions? Because personally, I don't think either of those were penalties, but you might have a different opinion.
Well, you're probably not going to like this, Craig. And I will say that I actually didn't see the whole game, but I did come
Mhm.
back in time to watch the second half. And I did also see the highlights of the goals that were scored. And I will say right now that, you know, you once again proved why you've been the better of the two teams this season in the games that you've
Yeah,
played. And certainly the penalty shout against Maguire was, non-existent.
yeah,
We've been having this
completely.
debate, myself and a few friends of mine, over the issue of what will constitute a handball in the box. And there have been some issues again. Like, for example, as a defender, you know, when a corner kick or a free kick sort of comes into the area and you pretty much have the responsibility to try to levitate yourself and try to head the ball away,
Yeah,
invariably you've got to try to move your hands, but there can be a way to sort of move it. And a lot of people will seem to think that unless you're able to literally have your hands at both sides like this in what is a very unnatural position, you can't rise up to head the ball. And the letter of the law says that if it's in an unnatural position, and that is defined as an unnatural position, if the hand is enough away from you, then then a penalty has to be given. And we've seen a few given, most notably in the bottom of the table clash between Luton and Sheffield United at Kenilworth Road.
Yeah.
And there's always going to be, a lot of contention about the penalties awarded. So we can both agree that Maguire didn't have a case for which to answer there because his hands were pretty much at his body, and with
Yeah.
all the experience of having played for Leicester, being a part of their, I don't remember if he was a part of the title-winning team in 2016. He might have been. I don't
Yeah.
know. Ironic, of course, that having joined Manchester United, he's never won a title since, but at least he has a Premiership winners' medal with a different club, and also having earned so many caps for England. He knows as well that there are some moments where, you have to make sure that you have the common sense to keep your arms close to your chest and not keep your hands in an unnatural position. And obviously the circumstances there were that he had his arms almost literally taped to his body, as I have told you.
Yeah.
And so there was no chance of a penalty being given against him.
Yeah.
As far as Adam Smith was concerned, obviously it was very unfortunate. It did deflect onto his, his hand from the floor.
Yeah.
But then Adam should never have put his hand that far away from his chest in the first place. And so ideally, normally whenever you are a defender and you're defending in the box, you also put your hands behind your back
Yeah.
and you put them together. You sort of try and hold them together behind your back so that there is no chance of a handball being given against you. And it's about, being cognizant of the situation, about being observant and being able to make sure that you know what's happening and that you're not going to be, penalized for, for a moment of negligence. It's like, I remember speaking to you backstage and talking with a Sporting Connection about a cricket example where sometimes, and I have to bear in mind, of course, that some of our listeners may not necessarily be cricket fans. I think the closest county team to Bournemouth, the southeast coast, would in fact be Hampshire. So
Yes.
if you do live near the area and can get to see a county game or two, it would be an experience in itself, and definitely one of the finest grounds in the UK, of course. But if, as a batsman, you are standing at the non-striker's end, and you sometimes try to get a head start by moving away from your crease so that once the batsman at the striker's end sort of tips the ball, and then you can run further.
Yeah.
If the bowler sees you going out of your crease and the bat's out of your crease, he can take the ball and break the stumps, and then you will, be given out. And that is, of course, some consequence of your own negligence. And we've seen several experienced cricketers fall foul of that. But another perfect example is, especially when you're driving and let's say you're taking a holiday to the US.
Yes.
And, you're having to drive, you're renting a car and you're driving. One thing you will notice that the steering wheel of those cars in America will be on the left and the traffic moves on the right side of the road. And so if, heaven forbid, you were to get involved into an accident, if you were to say to the judge you had no idea that in America people drive on the right and that in the UK the custom is to drive on the left, the judge will pretty much say, I'm sorry, but you can't be negligent of the traffic laws in our country if you come over here. And especially if you are coming as a tourist, it's your responsibility to know the laws and customs. And players have to know the laws of the game, how they're being interpreted, learn from some of these contentious incidents and work on ways to try to avoid doing that. And that would mean that if you are, in the case of trying to jump for a corner or a free kick which comes into the penalty area, you've got to try and find a way to levitate yourself without keeping your hands so wide as if you're trying to fly like a bird or something like that.
Yeah.
And that is something that the defensive coaches are going to have to work on with their players. Obviously, that's not what happened with Adam, but as unfortunate as it is, it was a penalty by the letter of the law. Could some discretion have been, applied with the help of the VAR officials? Maybe, but maybe not. And that is, of course, where another grey area sort of comes in. And this is another reason why, Craig, I always say that it's very important that referees and refereeing associations get together before the start of every season and make sure that they set some proper ironclad guidelines, leaving room for a few caveats on how the rules should be interpreted. And people are having a lot of these issues about how VAR has made the game worse. I disagree. We need VAR in times like this because there were dreadful decisions given back in the day without VAR, and several teams bore the brunt of those poor decisions. Do we really want to go back to those days? VAR is here to stay, but how it's applied is always going to be the problem. And how the rules have to be implemented and enforced and also set will also determine if we're going to have any more controversial incidents such as this next season. So as far as Smithy is concerned, I'm sorry, but, as unfortunate as that might have looked, I think he may look back on that and say, you know what, maybe I shouldn't have stuck my right hand out. But as I'm going to say right now, and I will say this again, the biggest satisfaction that you can take is that with a goals aggregate of 5-2 in your favour, especially after that magnificent win at Old Trafford, I think you've shown that you are easily the better team. And for a club like Manchester United to only take 1 point off Bournemouth, I loved watching, seeing those results, obviously, and the way you played in both games was magnificent. But for a club of Manchester United's history and heritage, 1 point against Bournemouth is absolutely awful. And, they're going to have to look back on their season and say, you know what, unless they can get rid of the inconsistencies that have plagued them, they're not going to challenge for top honours. I suppose for what it's worth, they are in contention to possibly win the FA Cup, and they should have it reasonably easy against a Coventry side managed by their former striker, Mark Robbins, who many people claim was the bloke who saved Sir Alex Ferguson's job. But in the final, they will either face a wounded Manchester City after last night, we must say, or they will face a Chelsea team that have been as inconsistent, but also are now getting into a little bit of momentum come the end of the season. And of course, they will be scarred by the events at Stamford Bridge that day. But again, Bournemouth should take a great deal of satisfaction. You've got you've got more than 50 points this season, and there are still 6 games to play. So I wouldn't be surprised if you are able to get maybe about 6 or 7. If you can possibly get 60 points this season, that would be magnificent. But mind you, you will have to play an Aston Villa side that are currently, and as I speak, they've also, suffered a huge setback. They're 2-0 down in France, and their European journey is about to end. So they're also now going to put all of their energies in trying to secure top 4 themselves. And after that big win against my lot at the Emirates, you will have a tough job on your hands, believe you me.
Yes, most definitely. And of course, Aston Villa are going for the Champions League places, which, it looks very, very likely they are going to get now. They've been fantastic. When you consider, and of course, we had Richie Neville from the boy band 5 on the show. When you consider this is the same sort of side that, was beaten in our first game back in the Premier League. Scott Parker's only win as Bournemouth manager in the Premier League. It shows what a remarkable job Unai Emery has done. And I've got to ask the question, Manny, do you feel that Arsenal just got rid of him too quickly?
Unai Emery is a quality manager. Let's get this straight.
Yeah.
It's very unfortunate now that obviously with Aston Villa having 20 minutes to save their European campaign, they might end up falling out of Europe. But let's also not forget that this is now officially his first full season with the club.
Yeah.
He came in obviously at Aston Villa to replace Steven Gerrard, who had them dangerously close to the relegation zone. And the recovery from the threat of relegation to European qualification by the end of that season was nothing short of magnificent.
Yeah.
It is fair to say, of course, that one of those players who was pivotal to that was Emiliano Martinez. And I will say that at that before the World Cup, at that point in the season, he wasn't necessarily having the best season, and neither were the team. And the team just wasn't having any, ideas on how to cope with everything and how to play. But after the World Cup, after he won it with Argentina and won the best goalkeeper award for that tournament, you could see that the confidence and the mojo started to come back, and he was actually playing quite a bit better. And it's taken quite a bit of time for Emery to, really start implementing his own style and his own tactics on the Villa team. But they've responded very well, and you can see how well he's doing. And he is, tactically very flexible. He prefers the 4-4-2, but can switch into a 4-2-3-1 at times, depending on how he organizes his defense and his midfielders. And that tactical flexibility was in brilliant display on Sunday when, despite not having Douglas Luiz in the midfield, who has been their talisman this season in that area, they literally, soaked up our press magnificently. And then in the second half, they played us off the park. And I've always been critical of them this season, saying that they are effectively a first half team because in the second half they start to capitulate. But maybe they're starting to get some form at the best possible time. And maybe this European adventure could have proved to be a step too far in some ways. But there is still time. There is still reason for hope. And I'm still hopeful. But, they can legitimately say that they've got bigger fish to fry because a few seasons ago, they had gotten promoted under Dean Smith.
Yeah.
They were very nearly sent back down under Steven Gerrard, and now look where they are. And so, segueing back to your question, he is a quality manager, but after Arsene Wenger left the club, it was always going to be the wrong time for him to join.
Yeah.
Because as a man, it's a little bit like the whole David Moyes situation when he replaced Alex Ferguson at Manchester United.
Yeah.
The great Scot was there for the best part of over 20 years, one would say. And it's not easy to replace someone like that. With Wenger, he was there for a similar period of time, but didn't have quite as much success as Ferguson did. Bear in mind, after Mourinho came into the picture, our chances for success ended up getting a little bit smaller in that regard. And his last 10 years were not very successful. Yes, we were able to win a few FA Cups, and he is, of course, our most successful manager in the history of the FA Cup. But when it came to competing for the league and in Europe, in Europe, we would flatter to deceive more often than not. And in the league, we'd start brilliantly, we'd have our hopes raised, but then we'd fall away. Almost similar to what's happening now with us. And it just got to a stage where after a few seasons, we got tired of it. And especially after he wasn't able to get us back into the Champions League by winning the Europa League, he eventually decided, and I respect him for that it wasn't, useful. It served no purpose to have him stay on for too much longer, and it was time to move on. But there were some people who were still held on to the happy memories of our 2 League and Cup doubles and the Invincible season and thought, we can't just replace all of that. And Emery came in and tried his best. But what angered me so much, Craig, was that obviously he spent almost all of his time in Spanish football. He was, of course, manager of PSG before joining us. And before he joined us, he, of course, won the domestic treble with Paris Saint-Germain. No, he wasn't able to win the Champions League with them, but no manager has been able to win the Champions League. Luis Enrique may, break that trend. But hopefully, because I'm not too fond of the club. I mean, I am hopeful that Borussia Dortmund can knock them out, but if they don't, then either Real Madrid or Bayern Munich should have their chances to end the Parisians' dreams. But, Emery was always going to be a manager who was very serious and dedicated to his job and definitely tried to do well. And obviously his English wasn't the best. But to hear some fans mock him for his attempts to say good evening, he pronounced the V like a B. So that whole good evening thing became a meme, as you probably would know.
Yeah.
And they were never really willing to, warm to him in that particular respect. And that first season, we were playing some good football. We did have our share of dodgy performances and dodgy results. People are going to take a look at the game at Vicarage Road against Watford, where we conceded something like 30 shots and say that, that was a low point. But then there's always going to be context. We did secure a draw. How many of those shots were on target? People still will deflect and say they don't want to know, although we can easily look that up and maybe I'll be proved wrong. And in spite of all these difficulties, he was able to get us to 1 point off the top four. We just missed out on Champions League football because, I think for some reason the players also down tools on him. He got us to the Europa League final where we got to play against Chelsea. But then I think the players down tools on him there. And Petr Cech in his final game as an Arsenal player and as a football player before retiring was the best player on the pitch for our team. And next season, I think results weren't really as good as we would have liked them to be, but we weren't in that bad of a position, and there was nothing to suggest that we wouldn't have made a recovery. But then people got impatient, and I think we were going on a pretty poor run of form. And I was one of a number of people who said if he's not going to be given the respect from the board or the fans that he rightly deserved, and we weren't able to arrest the poor run of form, then the right thing to do was to ask him to leave. And we haven't. The last manager we sacked midway through a season was Bruce Rioch, and of course he directly preceded Arsene Wenger.
Yeah.
And so for a long time we haven't considered ourselves a sacking club by any means, and that wasn't what I wanted to do either. But what happened with Emery was absolutely horrible in many ways. And I'm not going to be one of those people who will say that I'd like to have Emery back, because I remember mentioning that poem by Felix Dennis, Never Look Back. Yeah. In the same way, Emery has a great home now at Aston Villa. He's got some terrific people working with him. And obviously the players adore him and respect him. The fans also adore him and respect him. And if he's having the time of his life there, he may be wanted by by clubs of the stature of Manchester United and maybe other clubs around Europe. But why would he want to leave Aston Villa when he's actually building something magnificent? And if he is able to secure Champions League football, then that will go a long way to helping them pay down. Not pay down their debts, but also help balance their own books, given that they've lost revenue. And maybe they can also buy a few players and help strengthen their squad in preparation for that Champions League campaign and avoid making some of the mistakes that Newcastle United did under Eddie Howe. So,
yeah.
I wouldn't say I really would have liked things to work out with Emery, but he was really under the 8 ball from the word go. And you're still going to have some fans who say that the football we played under him was awful. But what people don't realize, Craig, is that he gave the likes of Bukayo Saka, Emi Martinelli and others, and Emile Smith-Rowe and others, their chances to come from the Hale End and play for the first team. So he, if anything, was laying some foundations for Arteta to take the team forward. And that's why I'm not about to give Arteta all the credit he deserves, because Emery was trying his hardest to do a really good job with us. He just wasn't given the respect or the support he deserved. And that is why, it was for the best that he left. But I am really happy for him that he's doing well. And that is why I am still really hopeful that Aston Villa can at the very least send the tie into extra time. But sadly, time is, running out. I don't know how long they will have. And they probably have barely a few minutes left to save their campaign. I don't think they'll be able to do that. But at least given the fact that he was able to take Villa back into Europe after a gap of how many years, that is wonderful. And so people are willing to say that Arteta should be cut some slack. But just because he was handed the job as a novice, that doesn't mean that he should really be that immune from any kind of criticism. People are happy to criticize Emery because of his own experience in comparison to Arteta's. But Emery has been given in many ways the short end of the stick. And, I wanted things to work out with him and us at Arsenal. But it was just unfortunate that circumstances dictated that he had to leave. But I will always respect him. I will always consider him a fine manager. And if Aston Villa secure Champions League football next season, you can bet that I will be watching their campaign with interest. And they will take a lot of lessons from this campaign and take them forward. And who knows what will happen? Well done to him, I say.
Yep, most definitely. And I think it's going to be a very, very tough game. I think they will get 4th spot. The one thing I would say is that Emery, like you say, it was a bit like an Alex Ferguson, David Moyes situation where Moyes stepped into the shoes of Ferguson. Ferguson knew that side was always on its decline. That's why he made that call then. I think Wenger wasn't like that, but Wenger probably held on whilst the decline was happening, and he couldn't arrest it. It kind of ruined, the last couple of years of his tenure there. But Emre, I think it, did a very, very good job of starting to turn around, the ship. So yeah, he is an excellent manager, and I think he's benefited from his time at Villarreal as well. So yeah, hopefully, fingers crossed, Villa can go from strength to strength and get that equaliser, to equal the tie, I should say, overall. But one thing I did want to speak to you about, because, like I said, in the interview with Rich Neville, um, PSR. PSR come up again. And of course, Aston Villa, if they don't get in the Champions League, could be subject to that. Now, we've already spoken about it in quite some detail, but you've got Everton, you've got Forest, you've got Leicester next year. You could potentially have Aston Villa. I have spoken to somebody from Wolves. You'll have to wait for that one. But Wolves do look safe, but there was a lot of murmurings about them. There's all sorts of things coming out of the woodwork with regards to PSR. But there's also now the FA Cup, and of course the FA Cup and the replays being scrapped, and I I am very, very worried where football is going at this moment in time under Richard Masters. He seems to be changing the fabric of the game, the integrity of the game, points deductions. Never did I want to see a Premier League with points deductions on it. The Portsmouth one, you could kind of understand because of administration. Even then, I think, clubs should be helped, but maybe put under transfer embargoes. But Portsmouth were always going down that season. Of course, there was the other one as well, the Middlesbrough
Yeah.
situation, where they couldn't travel to Blackburn because there was illness in the camp, and that effectively relegated them. So points deductions are a terrible, terrible thing, at all levels of football. But Richard Masters using this and now changing the FA Cup to suit them. 33 million is a small amount of money when you consider how much the Premier League brings in.
Hmm.
33 million is also, you know, not going to go very far with certain clubs. Further down the pyramid, the grassroots game, you can imagine that's going to be spread out a lot. And therefore, it's not going to do much. But it seems like it is all aimed, all these scrapping of replays. Because let's throw an example out there, Farnborough. Because I know that Arsenal played the old incarnation of Farnborough quite a few years
Oh
back, and
yes.
I remember actually, wasn't it Havant and Waterlooville played
Oh
Liverpool
yes.
and actually went in the lead twice against them?
Former Bournemouth goalkeeper Kevin Scriven was in goal that day, I think.
Yes, yes, you're spot on. But you think if a side like that gets to the third round and manages to hold a club that is big, why should they not have the benefit of taking that club to their home ground? And it just feels, Manny, that Richard Masters is ruining, not just the Premier League but English football at the moment.
Oh, he is. The sad part about the whole FA Cup thing is that it's been probably, and I should stand corrected, it wasn't. I think it is Kevin Scriven, right? I think I said that, didn't I?
Yeah, yeah,
Great, thank you very much indeed. I would never have
yeah.
forgiven myself if I'd have gotten that wrong. But the sad part is that this whole thing of regarding the FA Cup has been coming for quite some time. You mentioned Farnborough and how we played them.
Mhm.
Around about that same period of time, maybe a few years after that, I think it was Glenn Roeder that then West Ham manager, Lord rest
Yeah.
his soul, of course, he passed away due to a heart attack. He basically said that the idea of having FA Cup replay should now change because, teams aren't able to cope with the heavy fixture workload.
Hmm.
Now, here's the deal. When you have a situation where the bigger clubs are able to, bring in a great deal of money via revenue and also have squads to help them compete in
Yeah.
Europe as well as domestically, you know, having a huge conjectured schedule of games is pretty much a part and parcel of it. You
Hmm.
can't expect to want the glory of having more chances to win and maybe winning something if you are not willing to accept that there will be pitfalls, namely, you know, games coming in, and this is why you have big squads and certain big clubs, mind you. Let's not forget, have the and yes, Arsenal, I'm looking at you. They have the tendency to put out effectively youth teams for the Carling Cup, for the League Cup games. It's not the Carling Cup; it's the
Hmm.
Carabao Cup, but I'll call it the League Cup from now onwards. It's had so many names
Do you
to
know
it over the
what?
years.
I've
It's
done that.
scary. It's ridiculous. The League Cup is how I will call it. To heck with all of these sponsors and their things. But you know, Arsenal normally put out youth teams for the League Cup games, and
Yeah.
sometimes they win, but more often than not they lose.
Hmm.
And we're often criticised for never taking the League Cups seriously. In fact, it will be about 31 years since we last won the League Cup, going on 32. And the last time we were in the League Cup final, it was under Arsene Wenger, but we contrived to lose to Birmingham City following a last-minute mix-up between the goalkeeper, Wojciech Szczesny, and the Polish-French defender, Laurent Koscielny, both of
Hmm.
whom have since left the club, and boy, am I grateful for that. And, you know, as a big club, if you want to compete in that many tournaments, you've also got to accept that that's why you need a bigger squad of players, so that you play some players in one competition, you play other players in another competition, and they will all be competing for those big prizes. And that's sort of the way it is. But
Yeah.
and replays, of course, have been a big lifeblood in many ways for the lower division teams. If they are talented enough to force a draw, they have the chance of being able to earn another chance to play against them. The replay could be at the bigger team's ground, or they could be so lucky to play the first leg at the bigger team's ground and earn the windfall. And if they get a draw over there,
Hmm.
then they will talk about that for a long period of time. And even in the case of Havens and Waterloo, well, at least they will remember that beautiful day when that collection of part-timers, a few of whom were, bin men, if memory serves me right,
Yep.
took a 2-0 lead against the mighty Liverpool under
Mm.
Rafa Benitez. So those the smaller clubs need the FA Cup. They need the replays. They need the revenue, and for them to be effectively denied most of that is really terrible. I think you got it spot on when you said that the £33 million that has been offered by Masters, I think, and company, I think it's a drop in the bucket. Really, it's as if Masters is treating the lower clubs as if they were no more than common serfs, and that's disgusting.
Mm.
So you can't just offer them that sort of a consolation prize, a throwaway amount, and say, you know what, we're going to do everything we can to try and help you. And I do get the point that with the advent of the Europa Conference League, and obviously with the increase of the Champions League team pool to 36, I think, and a 32-team Club World Cup being organised, the amount of European fixtures are going to be increased. But that doesn't affect the majority of the clubs in the Football League. It only affects those clubs that want to, that end up winning everything and qualifying for those tournaments, but they just don't want to have the added stress of having to play too many fixtures, and it's absolutely stupid in many ways. It's as if this game, which used to be a working people's game, very much a socialist game, is now more and more becoming a capitalist kind of haven, and that is not what we want to see at all. And you don't want to have a situation where, under this capitalist, almost Thatcherite system, the top clubs get more and more money and end up having more loopholes, and the smaller clubs are forced to try and build themselves up by their bootstraps, but strapped for cash, they will fall by the wayside. It's
Yeah.
absolutely disgusting. And the reason why I'm really glad you also spoke about Farnborough is that I think I might have mentioned this in an earlier episode of Cherry Picking. There was a situation where we were supposed to go and play at their home stadium, which had a
Mm.
capacity of 4,100.
Yeah.
I don't think it had really any good facilities at the time. Sky Sports were only willing to show coverage of the match if it was played at the Amita. But the people involved between the two teams came to the conclusion that for safety reasons, it just wouldn't be practical to hold it there,
Hmm.
especially when you consider that, Arsenal would have had a large number of fans coming in, which would have exceeded the capacity of that stadium, and not by half. So they agreed to effectively hold the home tie at the at Highbury, I think it was, yes.
Yeah.
And what happened was that the Farnborough fans got a great day out of it. Yes, they lost the match. I think it might have been 5-1, I think, but they did score a goal. They'll
Hmm.
take that memory back with them. And they also got some pretty good revenues from ticketing and so forth. So all's well that ends well in many ways.
Yeah.
And that really is an issue with regard to the replays because, especially if big clubs are going to be effectively denied the chance to have a replay at a bigger team's ground. I mean, the smaller clubs are going to be denied the chance to have a replay at the bigger team's ground. They miss out on that whole experience. So my idea, and I don't think the FA will consider this, but my idea would be, regardless of how the teams are drawn, I want to see a situation where the bigger team, effectively hosts, and ends up having its ground conducting the tie.
Yeah.
So, like what happened with Farnborough and Arsenal back in the day, I'd like to see a situation where the away team has the home team stadium as their home ground of sorts. That way, what happens is that with the bigger capacity, it could increase ticket. It could lead to increased ticketing revenues, and the smaller clubs should have the bigger share of that. That way, the smaller clubs will get a lot more money. They will have a good day out, and it will be everything will be completely hunky dory, and that is the way things should hopefully be. Why should the bigger clubs have to be given free rides everywhere? And it's not about trying to to slap down penalties for being successful, but if you aspire to be a very big club and you want to have a big squad, then you prepare for these congested fixtures. But the problem with these big clubs, Craig, is that as you would agree, they become greedier. They
Yeah.
want to have the penny and the bun. They don't want to give up anything.
Hmm.
And for the FA to just kowtow to them in a way, I think it's absolutely rotten. And I don't even want to. I don't even want to. Um, like I said, I don't really want to continue to talk too much about that because it'll make my blood boil even more. Because
Yeah.
football has to be a game for everyone, and grassroots and smaller teams and grassroots football have to feel collectively that they are not being neglected because there's no fruit without a good root. And if you ignore that, if you focus on everything at the top, then you're going to be asking for trouble. So I would like to see some bigger clubs as fans stand in solidarity with some of the smaller clubs and say, you know what, there's no way we can do this. The big problem is, though, Craig, is that fans of the bigger clubs are probably going to look out more for themselves. You've seen the protests, for instance, at Manchester United about how their affairs are being run. And yet, I don't know if they would take the time of day out to stand in solidarity with some of the smaller clubs and say, you know what, they should. You shouldn't take away the replays for the FA Cup. You should do more for them, and you shouldn't rob these clubs of their possible revenues. But you know, I just don't know if they will be willing to stand shoulder to shoulder with them, and I only hope that in the coming days, the FA will understand the backlash that's come from this and realize that, we can't continue to do this. And I'd like to compliment you for making a video on this. I'm sorry if I didn't get to see it, but hopefully, you've listened to what I have to say and you might be in
Yeah.
agreement with everything.
Oh, completely agree with it. Completely agree with it, mate, because I feel that Richard Masters at this moment in time is just destroying, because it's really for the likes of Manchester City and Chelsea. And I pick those two out. Of course, a lot of people will say the big six, of course, which Arsenal are one of. But it's Manchester City and Chelsea who have broken the rules in the Premier League, and it's a case that it's for those sorts of clubs why it's happening. It would make it a lot more difficult. Say, for example, Chelsea were very good and had to go through replay after replay after replay. That is their problem. If they have to rest players to actually focus on the Premier League, that is again their problem. Now, what I think the Premier League is worried about is Chelsea going, right, okay, we're going to rest players because we've got Manchester United in the FA Cup. But again, that's a decision that is being made by them. And I personally think that Masters is just messing with the integrity of the football, the whole pyramid of football now. Whereas before it was just the Premier League with these asterisks all over the division. It's not fun, and I agree with what you say. Bigger clubs fans do need to stand up, do need to be counted, because I personally think, okay, it's all well and good, you know, a Bournemouth fan and a group of Everton fans, which, let's be honest, Richard Masters has chosen not to listen to for all this time and listen to their process. He doesn't care about Everton. They are. And actually, I'd quite like to put this to you. Everton, I think, have got every reason to be aggrieved because they're kind of, they are the guinea pig for Masters' plan because yes, PSR, I can understand the logic of it is a sensible logic. Make sure that we don't have a Portsmouth or a Reading or a Wigan or someone like that in the future. So I can understand that model. But what about an ambitious owner? What if Bill Foley wants to go, right, you know what? I'm going to really put some money into this, serious money to try and expand. We can't do it. It's impossible. Newcastle have found
Agreed.
that. Aston Villa have found that. Everton tried it, and of course was backed by a Russian billionaire. And, of course, with the Ukraine war that started, that Russian billionaire had to walk out. They're left with Farhad Mashiri, who it's quite clearly isn't the money man. Marinakis, when Forest were promoted, again had to spend a lot of money. He showed some ambition, and that ambition's been put back in the box because, and it's going to get to a point in a minute, Manny, where it will be a case where nobody can challenge Manchester City because they've got these 115 charges. They're not going to do anything to them because they're too valuable to the Premier League. Imagine if they relegated Man City. Haaland decides to go over to the German Bundesliga. Goes plays for Bayern Munich. Kevin De Bruyne decides, right, I'm going to go and play for Real Madrid. That's what they're fearful of. But they shouldn't be fearful of that. What they should be fearful of is ruining the whole integrity, making an example of one of the founding members of the Football League and effectively, you know, making it a little bit of a closed shop. There's going to be a point where Manchester United and Arsenal aren't going to be able to get near Manchester City or compete with Manchester City, on a regular basis because the case will be that you'll need to spend money to get there. And
Yep.
it's Yeah, it's a crazy, honestly, it's a crazy situation. You've got to look into as well. You know, the owners of Manchester City sponsor the stadium. Now, if they want, and this is a big thing, if they want to spend money, they just increase the amount of sponsorship that they're providing to the football club, which is going to get them around PSR.
I'd certainly, get everything you've said, and it's another example, really, of how smaller clubs are always going to be a little bit hamstrung in that particular respect by the constraints that are, around them. And
Mhm.
even with Aston Villa, and as I speak, they've actually gone into extra time. It was Matthew Cash who scored the
Excellent.
equaliser in the 88th minute. So the dream is still alive, at least for extra time. And if it goes to penalties, I'm still backing Emi Martinez. But again, I'm still hopeful for Villa, and maybe that they can expand, because the challenge though for Villa is that they can't afford to make the mistakes that a club like Portsmouth made as well,
Mhm.
because let's not forget that when Henry Redknapp, his real name is Henry, but I know we call him Harry.
Yeah.
He won the FA Cup for Portsmouth at that time with
Mhm.
what I would call a star-studded team.
Yeah.
There were ex Gunners, Solskjaer, Jeremiah Campbell, Nwankwo Kanu, among others. David James, of course, England goalkeeper, and several players who've played at the top level. I believe there were several others, and in fact, it was Kanu who got the winner that day against Cardiff City. I think what happened was that with the prospect of playing in Europe and trying to, keep themselves in the Premiership, I think they spent a little bit too much and were banking on, the big nights. But it came at a cost to them, and everything came crashing down. And it happened with Leeds as well. So Aston Villa would be wise not to try to, make those mistakes, trying to go too big
Mhm.
too soon. But obviously, if they make the Champions League, and if they somehow manage to go further in this Conference League, which I hope they do,
Yeah.
then they are going to be taken seriously as a European team. And a lot of good players in Europe would be delighted to come and play for Unai Emery because of the reputation that he has. But again, when it comes to clubs like, the Evertons and the Bournemouths and the others who obviously would have wanted to try to expand and go further, but obviously couldn't, and are now facing the prospect of being cut adrift, while the likes of Manchester City will, be kept in their ivory tower and not harmed. It's really harmful. It's really hurtful. And you'd think that back in the day, in the early 90s, a team like Marseille were never too good to escape punishment. They
Mhm.
literally had the book thrown at them in the early 90s after the whole corruption scandal, was exposed. And they also were, I think they were relegated from Ligue 1 at the time, and they had to fight their way back to re-establish themselves as a force in French football.
Yeah.
So if it could happen then, why can't it happen now? And the answer is simple, because as you've said, Manchester City have become a little bit of a cash cow in a way, because with their success, it's not for nothing that they say that nothing succeeds like success. When you win big prizes, and with a little help from, the sheikhs or whoever it may be,
Mhm.
um, you're going to get some new fans coming in who want to, be a part of that. You'll have a lot of dormant fans coming back who want to be a part of that. And, in this current age, success really begets success in terms of more merchandise sales, more TV revenues, and what have you. So it's a sad state of affairs where it seems that there doesn't seem to be enough room at the top, and it seems to be more of a closed shop where people are not being willing to let any newcomers in.
Mhm.
But all we can do, Craig, is hope that common sense will prevail, and that Manchester City and Chelsea will eventually have the book thrown at them, but also that the other clubs will also make it a point to balance their books and make sure they play well and within their means. And in Villa's case, the only big club that they will have to play in their run is Liverpool at Villa Park. They do have some good fixtures coming up, including, of course, against Bournemouth. And I think your interview with Richie from Five was a bit of a preview to that. And both of
Yeah.
you predicted a tight 2-1 Villa win. It'll be interesting to see, of course, how things transpire, because I think that would be played on a Sunday. There's no way that the Premier League would be that stupid to allow Villa to make Villa play on a Saturday, especially now
Yeah.
we know that they've gone to extra time. But Villa are in a good position, and I think with the advisors that Emery has, as I said, they're going to make sure that the club operates very sensibly and avoids these issues. It was wonderful as well to hear Richie say how the whole profit and sustainability thing was, conceived by a certain Mr. Berlusconi. He was, of course, as Richie said, the Italian leader at the time, but he was also president of AC Milan. And that bloke was embroiled in so many corruption scandals during
Yeah.
his time. It's scary. I mean, it's like you've got a poacher turned gamekeeper, and the gamekeeper is now setting the rules. It is disgusting in many ways, and it really does, reek. You know how they say the fish rots from the head down? Well, the
Yep.
people behind this whole profit and sustainability thing are some of the biggest embezzlers and most corrupt people you will ever hear about.
What happens with Richard Masters? I think, he has to resign. This season has been a complete failure from him. He hasn't improved VAR. The panel of referees, I think the quality has gone down because, VAR has taken too much control. I think, really what should happen is what happens on the continent, where, if a referee decides that they want to go and check the monitor, they're alerted, they go check the monitor, they make their own decision. Those referees, like referees, in the past, the Premier League referees were, very good, like Mark Housey, Paul Durkin, Uriah Rennie, Graham Pole. Those sort of people were, excellent referees. But, it's yeah. Hopefully, fingers crossed that he can sort that out. But secondly, you know, I just think the points deductions thing. Do you think Richard Masters has to resign?
If he has any shame, he should, but I don't think he will. And
No.
it will really take an even bigger backlash to force him to resign. And the worst part about the whole VAR thing, Craig, is that if they wanted, they could improve the technology. They could see how things are being conducted in Europe and how they've been conducted in major tournaments where controversy is avoided, and say, we need to make sure we do things better. The
Yeah.
problem is, I think the Premier League, they love the controversy that's generated by all of these poor decisions and all this stuff, because it adds to the intrigue, it adds to the drama, and it
Mhm.
sells. And so I don't see that changing anytime soon. But a responsible person will say, look, there's going to come a time when people are going to tire of this and say, we're sick and tired of having the integrity of the game taken away. If you guys care so much more about your bank balance and your pay packets and the actual welfare of the game,
Mhm.
that you don't care about losing us, well, one day you will lose us, and you will feel the pinch. But sadly, when it comes to football fans, in the words of Gloria Estefan, they just can't stay away from the game. So Masters is a very lucky person, but the tide will eventually turn. Eventually, and one thing we learn from history is that
Mhm.
even if people at the top may, enjoy living a life of Riley while being corrupt, it never lasts
Yeah.
forever. Eventually, all things come to an end, and I do believe that the day will come when people come to their senses, and I'm sure I'm sure the day will come when Masters decides, what, um, I can't keep doing this. It's not going to be fair. But I really don't see that happening. And this guy, as you've said, Craig, is the one who will literally bring about more and more of the, you know, how do I put this? All of the misfortune
Yeah.
and the bad vibes that will be coming down on the footballing structure in the UK. And if we care about the game, those of us who care about the game know that the grassroots football and the smaller teams have got to be given more than their fair share.
Completely agree. So hopefully Richard Masters will resign or be replaced at some point. That is my view, because it's just been an absolute mess this season. Everton is the biggest thing where, going from 10 points to 6 points, then back up to 8 points. It's just not fair on their fans, their players, and it could happen to any club. It could happen to us. It could happen to Palace. It could happen to Wolves. It could happen to Villa. And it's just not fair. It's just not fair. But I think we should wrap it up there. Manny, I'm sure we'll see you next week for some more cherry picking. I wonder what will happen during the following week. Of course, we got Wolves as well in midweek. So by the time that we've spoken, we will have played 2 games up at Villa, and of course against Wolverhampton Wanderers, side managed, of course, by Gary O'Neill. And actually, last point, Wolves. Gary. I was looking at a statistic earlier on. If the decisions hadn't gone against the Wolves that were deemed incorrect, they would be sat in 6th spot at the moment. They'd be sat in 6th spot with 11 more points. And that shows it's not working. The goal the other day, Max, I think it was Kilman, wasn't it? That scored against West Ham. That was a definite goal. Definite goal. You had the situation earlier on in the season against Manchester United. Well, the first game of the season, actually. Literally, Gary O'Neill had 4 days to sort it out, and his attacker was clattered by Anana in the Manchester United goal. I think it shows, and he's been really unlucky, hasn't he?
He has, and I don't want to. I'm not going to dismiss your what you stated by uttering the old cliche that if ifs and buts were sweets and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas, or if my aunt had a mustache, she'd be my uncle. But I think instead of saying all of those things, Craig, we've got to really appreciate that Gary has done a terrific job with Wolves, and he deserves to be given all the credit he can get. But the most important thing that happens now for him is that the Wolves board realise that they've got a good gem on their hands, especially when you consider, of course, let's not forget the circumstances in which he joined Wolves. Lopetegui had left the club, and I don't know if anybody was eager to come over to Molineux. And, he came in there, obviously was able to instill his style of play. The 3-4-3 formation has worked really well. And whenever the likes of Hee Chan Hwang and Kilman and Ryan Ait-Nouri and others have been at their best and performing, it's been a sight to behold in many ways. I mean, maybe not behold in that sense, but, they've been getting results. And the Wolves have been, howling. But with Bournemouth doing so well under Andoni, I think it's fair to say that it's been a happy, resolution for both clubs. And I think, the best thing now is that you're both at a stage where you can both be happy for one another and also happy for yourselves at the same time. You'd wish that things had been different, but sometimes you've also got to take happiness in the fact that you're in a better place right now. And that is, of course, exactly how I feel as an Arsenal fan for Unai Emery. And I'm sure he will deep down always have a great deal of respect and love for Liverpool. And Emi Martinez said, of course, that day he'll always love us. So I have no issues. Sadly, most members in my fan base with whom I'm ashamed to be associated don't feel that way. But back to O'Neill and Bournemouth, and also given that you're going to be playing him at Molineux, the 4-2-3-1 formation that Iraola is using and using a lot more has definitely worked a real treat. And, when it works really well, certainly with the likes of Kluivert coming in fact, I will definitely go so far to say that, Justin Kluivert should be, in my opinion, up there as one of the purchases of the season. Yeah. Mate, he has been terrific for you lot. Yeah. I don't know if he will perhaps reach the heights of his more illustrious father, but he is showing that he's more than capable of carving a niche for himself and really, getting back to the level that he had enjoyed when he was much younger. And who's to say that he can't kick on from here? If he could, somehow earn a sensational recall to the Dutch squad for the European Championships, oh boy, that would be absolutely magnificent. And it could make up for the pain that you felt in seeing the likes of Kiefer Moore, David Brooks and Chris Mepham just miss out with Wales. But the way you've been playing, obviously, it will be put to the test against Gary's team, and he might also have studied you lot and know how
Yeah.
you will play, and he will try to use his own formation to try to stifle how you play. I don't think he necessarily uses the 3-4-3 anymore. I think he's mixed it up a little bit, but he's also going to look to try to stifle your three attacking midfielders and maybe starve Dominic Solanke of any kind of service. And I would love Solanke to be considered for the England squad, but because he's with Bournemouth and Southgate doesn't fancy you lot, I don't think he'll get picked. Wait for the new manager to come in, and then maybe he'll give Solanke a chance, and I would love to see that too. So I think you're also going to have to make sure that you are well aware of how Gary will play and the type of players that he will obviously use. Ait Nouri, Matthew Doherty, Nelson Semedo, and a few others. They will obviously be key. I don't think Hee-chan is, I don't know if he's injured. I don't know if he's missed the last few games. I will have to look that up and maybe tell you separately. But they've got some really good players and a good team, and you are going to have to try to, get in behind their defense a lot more. And of course, with Aston Villa, Matthew Cash has recovered from his injury woes, and he, of course, started tonight and got that goal. So with Ezri Konsa coming back into the middle of the park, at least in theory, with Pau Torres alongside Konsa, they've got a stronger defense, although they've had to struggle tonight, conceding 2 goals against Lille, and I don't know what the scoreline is. And I can tell you now that it's half-time and extra time, and if it's still level, they'll go to penalties, and I'm not going to stick around and give you updates from there.
No, that's fair enough.
Yeah, but again, as well, you are going to have to try to find a way to nullify their midfield. I think Emery will still want to go back to his 4-4-2, but I think Louise will be suspended for the Cherries visit to Villa Park, so he might stick with that 4-2-3-1 formation, and that is pretty much the way it could potentially go. And he is a very smart, flexible tactician, so Iriola will have his work cut out trying to nullify Emery. But I tell you what, I remember saying that Emery is a terrific resource from whom Iriola can get some really good tips, because both of them are from the same region of Spain, the Basque region, San Sebastian or thereabouts. So there will certainly be a good crack between the two of them. And given that you're going to be in the Midlands for that period of 4 days, you might as well book a hotel and stay over there rather than going all the way back to the South Coast and then having to go back again. I think
Exactly.
you're going to have to organise something to do there, because Wolves and Aston Villa, of course, are both Birmingham-based or Midlands-based. So, yeah, mate, just pick a hotel, stay over there, find a place to train, and then save yourself the coming and going. I mean, it's Sunday and Wednesday, I think. So,
Yep,
be smart that way.
Yeah. Well, Manny, it's pleasure as always. No doubt you'll be back next week, won't you, for some more cherry picking?
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was actually, now that you mentioned it, hoping to try to get someone else to also come in and talk about the whole replay situation, but that bloke was busy. But hopefully, he may also be willing to talk with you for a preview of the Arsenal game, and I will make sure that the two of you get in contact. But when it comes to cherry picking, you know that I'll always be here. This is sort of our little thing, and
Yes.
I look forward to every Thursday. If it's Thursday, it must be Mr. Beasley.
Definitely. Well, we shall see you next week, Manny. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Do remember, like, subscribe, and hit the bell. It helps this channel grow. I don't know what I said before. I made it rhyme the other day, but yeah. But
just watch it back and remember it next time, or next time, better still, just note it down. Yeah.
Yeah, I shall do. But everybody, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next one.